Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Caritis. Today is March 11th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope everyone enjoyed their weekend. So some of the news that occurred today that I'm going to touch on is the White House submitted their budget to Congress today, and boy, is that a whopper. And then we have some last-minute ditch to maybe have a Brexit. It might actually take place, but will it actually happen? I'll give you some analysis on that, as it was just breaking news only a few hours ago. But first, to President Trump's budget. We are talking a staggering $4.7 trillion budget. $4.75 trillion, with the biggest capital T you can come up with on this budget. This is just unbelievable. It is unbelievable. It's a record, obviously. Maybe the president wants to make another record in somewhere else, but this is getting somewhat out of hand. Let me just go through a couple bullet points on what we have known to us so far going through this budget, and then I'll come back and give some commentary on each of these points. So there are increasing military spending by 5%. $8.6 billion is called for further border wall funding. It foresees trillion-dollar deficits for the next 4 years, and if you pay attention to this program, you know it's going to be for a lot longer than that. It does not balance the budget for 15 years, and then it provides cuts to the following areas: education, energy, the Interior Department, Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, the EPA. There are increases to fend off the opioid crisis, and then health care for veterans. It also calls for $200 billion in infrastructure spending and efforts to reduce prescription drug costs, which has obviously been something the president has been talking about for quite a while. And lastly, just as a reference to remind everybody that candidate Trump claimed that the national debt would be paid in full in 8 years. Well, so far, not so close, as the president and the Congress under his leadership have added $2 trillion. Because the president came in, it was around $20 trillion in national debt. It now sits, as I look at the U.S. debt clock, at $22,120 billion and counting. And if you look at it, usdebtclock.org, it will make your head spin, and I will touch on some of that more as we go through this budget. But we're talking about the increasing in the military spend. And remember, this is something that President Trump talks about quite a bit, at least in respects to his first 2 years, of the $700 billion that he gave to the Defense Department, and then $716 billion during his second year. And even if you recall, it was only a couple weeks ago when he was actually flying back from his summit in Hanoi, Vietnam, where he met with Kim Jong-un, when he stopped over in Alaska and he gave that sort of pep rally speech to the troops up there in the Air Force Base. He even sort of made a comment that seemed to me as if he was like, okay, enough's enough. That's a ton of money, which it is for the Defense Department. So it made it seem, to me at least, that he was going to be more, all right, that's a lot of money for those 2 years, let's start to cut back. Well, this budget increases military spending by 5%, which is even more than what the Defense Department was requesting from the White House. So I don't know if this is just a political ploy from the president. Obviously, these budgets and everything else today is highly politicized, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. You know, he wants to thump his chest, and obviously it is a good deterrent. You want to have a military that nobody dare threatens. I couldn't agree with that more. But it doesn't mean that you have to spend the most money in order to get it. I mean, if you know how to effectively and efficiently use that capital, you might be able to get that type of defense force for a lot less. So it's interesting to see why it went above what the Defense Department was requesting. And then back to the $8.6 billion in additional funding for the border wall. Now, this is an interesting scenario. I don't necessarily know if that's how much more money is going to be needed, because we're told quite often that the president is, he's a builder, which he is, and he's a great builder if you listen to him, and that he would only need a fraction of the total money that was requested back in the day, which was some $20 billion. And if he got his $5.7 billion in that last fiasco of negotiations, which led up to the government shutdown, obviously, the partial government shutdown, and obviously the subsequent national emergency declaration, the president's going to be going through about $5 billion. He's going to get it through various means, through other funds in the Defense Department, the Treasury Department, Homeland Security, and then he might be able to find and wrangle up some other dollars around other agencies throughout the government. Now, some of those initial funds from the Defense Department, that's really not going to be argued too much in court, but some of these other funds that the president might tap into, if he has to go deeper into the pockets, then he might run into some legal issues. So I don't know if this is a temporary olive branch of sorts to say, okay, you know what, here's 8.6, let's get some of this through again, let's do it the right way, let's get it through Congress, and maybe he'll say, I will happily remove the emergency declaration because I now have the proper funding to get the job done. And I hope that's how it is, because despite the fact that I overall agree with the president that there is a crisis on the border, and to an extent I agree with him on having to use the emergency declaration, it should have been done through Congress. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. This should have been handled 30-some years ago. It's just that President Trump is there. He's finally taking action with it, and everybody wants to throw a hissy fit. You now have a whole bunch of even Republicans who are concerned that this is going to cause a bad precedent. They say, he can't do this. He can't do this because if and when the Democrats regain the White House, this is going to be a terrible precedent, yada, yada, yada. Give me a break. The Democrats do not care. They don't care. President Obama did a whole bunch of things. He had executive orders. It's just what they do. This is the fault of the Congress because they have relinquished so much of their authority to the executive branch. So what do you think the executive branch and the leader of the executive branch, the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, what do you think he's going to do? If you give up your power and authority and you just say, well, we'll just give it to the secretary of this department, the secretary of that department, the president can maybe decide this, that, and the other, what do you think they're going to do? This is what happens. And when the Democrats suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, I mean, Trump can't do anything right. He can't do anything right. Today's Monday. If Trump told you it's Monday, they'd say, well, not in China it isn't. It's Tuesday over there already. Don't you know where you're at? I mean, the man can't win for nothing. Never seen anything like it in my life. And you know I criticize the president quite frequently. Quite frequently. Nobody gets a free pass. I don't even give myself a free pass. So the president's not going to get it. So continuing with this list, we have trillion-dollar deficits for the next 4 years, according to this budget. According to this budget. You know, if you listen to this show, it's going to be for a lot longer than that because of the economic headwinds that we are staring it's right in our face. It's right in our face, but we have nobody in our government that wants to be honest with us and really say, you know, this really isn't the best economy ever. It's just not. It's not. These projections, according to this budget, we will not have a balanced budget for 15 years. But you have to make that off of assumptions. And the assumptions that this White House makes are just not realistic. Now, that's par for the course. Every White House, Republican, Democrat, makes no difference, provides their budgets and gives assumptions that are just so unrealistic it's not even funny. So you want to talk about not balancing for 15 years, I mean, maybe double it. Because if we have a recession, deficits are going to double. Deficits double, you're up at 2 trillion, maybe 2.5, maybe even 3.5 trillion. If the recession is really that big and deep, I mean, now you're in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. And obviously, the further in debt you go, the longer it's going to take to get out of it. Now, there are quick ways to get out of the debt. The president could say, nobody's getting paid anything. They're not getting your principal back. You're not getting your interest back. Come and get it. That's not a good move, but that's one way you could do it. Another move would be to say, Central Bank, Federal Reserve, Chairman Powell, you want low interest rates anyways. You're really doing him and Han on the quantitative tightening. Just go back to quantitative easing. Get those printing presses going, and let's just print $22 trillion and give it to everybody. And then we'll call it a quits. He could do that, but then your dollars are going to be completely worthless. So you're not going to be able to buy anything, or if you do, a gallon of milk will cost you $500, a loaf of bread will cost you $250. That'll be the world you're living in. But at least we'd have no debt. So that's the other way you could do it. Again, I don't recommend that. Now, in regards to the cuts that we have so far, the education, I really don't have any problems with the federal government getting out of the world of education. In fact, I would love it if it was completely out of the education business. Just look at the money that is thrown to education and then look at the results. The analogy I like to use is like this. Say you have a financial advisor and you give him money to invest for you on your behalf. Okay, the first year you give him $100,000. At the end of the year, you have $90,000. So you lost $10,000. Okay, the markets fluctuate, they say. They go up, they go down. Everybody lost money. What are you going to do? But stay with it and continue to invest. So you do. After all, markets do fluctuate. Your neighbor, your brother, they lost money too. But, you're there for the long term, so let's see what happens. Next year comes, he loses another $10,000 for you. Same story. They go up, they go down, yada, yada, yada. Then the following year, same thing, maybe even worse. You're losing all this money, yet you keep sticking with them. Same thing with the government. We do nothing but put more and more money into the educational system, and students across the country are failing. They're failing. They can't read at the grade level they're at. They cannot do math at their proper grade level. It's just one thing after the next. We look now, we have this great, robust economy, and we do have a shortage of labor. Why? Because we don't have people with the skill sets and the education to fulfill these jobs. So, how long are you going to take until you say to your financial advisor, you're fired, get out of here, you lost too much money, you don't know what you're doing? How long until we say to the federal government in regards to education, amongst a whole other things, but at least with this bullet point, enough's enough. Evidently, more money does not fix the problem. So get out of it. Let the states figure it out. Let moms and dads figure it out. Let teachers and principals figure it out. Because clearly the federal government doesn't know what they're doing. So cuts to education, please, abolish the Department of Education for all I care. Department of Energy, Interior, there's going to be some cuts there. You're talking trillions of dollars. You can find several million, several hundred million just going through everywhere and finding inefficiencies somewhere or another. So little hits to the Interior Department, to the Energy Department. I think everything's going to be fine. The sun will rise, it will set, you will wake up. The days will continue. Now, some other things that will get a little bit more, let's say, politically interesting are some of the cuts to Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and the EPA, because obviously in the midst of the, Green New Deal, how can you cut the EPA? Well, I don't know why we have an EPA. All the states have their Department of Environmental Protection. Why isn't that enough? You basically have 50 EPAs around the country, and then you got to capstone it with the 51st in Washington, D.C. for the whole country. Let states deal with that. Isn't that what this country is all about? The United States of America? Why does everything have to be dictated from on high? I just don't get it. And then it's centralized. Maybe another state has a much better way of handling things. Maybe Colorado's fantastic, just for an example. I don't know if they are or not. Maybe Colorado is fantastic at managing environmental concerns. They just got it down. They got the right people. They got the right system. They know how to do it. Well, guess what? Wyoming, Arizona, Utah, Pennsylvania, Florida, Alaska, they can all get together with those bureaucrats and the people who lead that agency in Colorado and figure out how to do their jobs better. Instead, you get it from on high. That's the way you got to deal with it. And then businesses not only have to deal with the federal regulation, but now they got to deal with all the state regulation. You're just hitting somebody over the head with a frying pan. They stand up. You hit them again. I mean, it just never ends. This is why there is so much waste in the system. So cut the EPA too. That doesn't bother me at all. But it's going to cause an uproar with the Democrats. AOC, the boss. We'll see how upset she gets over this. And then politically speaking, the Democrats will go haywire over the EPA, Social Security for sure, and Medicare and Medicaid. But of course, they're going for Medicare for all, so there's no way you can cut that, according to them. So there's not going to be any give and take on that part of the budget, not during an election cycle. That's just not going to happen. And of course, no president ever gets their full budget through, nor should they. Nor should they. The purse strings are controlled by the Congress as it should be. Now, in regards to the increases that the Trump administration is looking for, the opioid crisis, so that's a worthy and noble cause, and hopefully more money does translate into better results. We will see. I will keep you posted on that as that transpires, but that is definitely a crisis. A lot of these drugs are coming and pouring over our southern border, in addition to illegal immigrants, human trafficking, sex trafficking. It's a human crisis. It needs to be stopped. Period. End of story. There's no debate here. It's not about compassion. There's plenty of places to find compassion, but being compassionate does not allow one to be stupid. You still have to use your common sense. You still have to uphold your oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, which means it is your obligation, above all else, to protect this country. You take an oath basically on a legal document, our Constitution, and then you don't care if people are breaking the law. Doesn't make any sense. But if you're a Democrat and you think that way, well, then there you go. I mean, that sort of explains it right off the bat, doesn't it? Then you have health care increases for veterans. I think that's worthy. I think veterans, especially those who served in combat, shouldn't have to pay a dime for anything when it comes to their health care, especially if it was, war-related or combat-related. I mean, these people are risking their lives. The things that they have to see and deal with are just unimaginable. So, I mean, the fact that there was so much problems in the VA for all those years was a disgrace to this country. I mean, it's a great thing when you turn on the television and you see a whole host of charities that are out there that are there to support these veterans. But then when you actually take a second and think about it, why should they even exist? I mean, it's fantastic that they do, and I'm glad that they do. And if you support them, keep supporting them. But my question is, why doesn't the government take care of these people 100%? They shouldn't need charity. They put their lives on the line. They left their families. They left their country to protect this country. Take care of them. Take care of them. And I just don't get that. But if you disagree, that's fine. And then we have the $200 billion in infrastructure spending. It's my understanding when I read some reports, I believe it's from the American Society of Civil Engineers, they put out a report. I don't recall if it's biannually or every 4 years, something like every 2 years, or every 4 years. I don't recall, but the last time I went through it, it was a while ago. But they were requesting, I think, about $3 trillion with a T worth of spending that would be needed to get this country's infrastructure up to, I believe it was a B, because they graded on a A to E or A to F schedule. And I think at the time that I read the last report, it was a D. We were a D or a D plus, D minus, I can't remember. But it was definitely a D, and to get it to a B would spend about $3 trillion. So this budget, this total budget to cover everything is $4.75 trillion. The American Society of Civil Engineers was claiming that we need just $3 trillion to get our infrastructure up to a B from a D. So, I mean, we got a long way to go. A long way to go. And infrastructure is needed. Of course, it's not sexy. It's not Space Force. It's not a whole bunch of new airplanes for the military that, that break sound barriers several times over and this, that, and the other. But it's needed. And when you have an economy as large as the United States, and the United States of America is a big country. I mean, just geographically speaking, you got to get goods and people to and from as quickly, as safely, and efficiently as possible. And this stuff, I mean, our infrastructure, it's just old. A lot of it's old, and a lot of you know this. On a day-to-day basis, you might be driving on, some bad roads, some shaky and shady bridges that you might not feel 100% safe traveling on. And of course, we've had some bad instances of bridge collapses in the not too distant past. And then lastly, we have the efforts to reduce prescription drug costs, which is noble. I mean, some of this stuff is out of hand. So I applaud the president, and hopefully the president and Congress. Of all of the things on this list, there's only a few that I really see that we might actually get some things. I think the opioid crisis we can get some agreement on. I think the increase for health care for veterans we can get some bipartisanship on. And then efforts to reduce prescription drug costs and the infrastructure spending. Everything else is going to be up in the air. And like anything else, there's going to be give and take. But I think $4.7 trillion, oh man, it's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And that's not for 10 years. Sometimes you go, well, how much something's going to cost or how much you're going to save over a 10-year period. CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they give their projections usually on a 10-year thing. This isn't for 10 years. $4.75 trillion for 1 year. Just 1 year. And let me just give you another thing before we get into Brexit. As I look at this clock and the numbers just keep spinning and spinning, the debt per citizen is $67,300. $67,300, that's the debt per citizen. Now, of course, we don't have babies and children paying taxes, so the debt per taxpayer is $180,600. So get your pocketbooks out, ladies and gentlemen, write a check for $180,000 to Uncle Sam so we can get this debt paid off. I don't think you're going to do it because I don't think you have it. I don't have it. Most people don't have all of that money to just give away on a whim to Uncle Sam, especially when he's not that good of a custodian with it because he's in $22 trillion of debt. And then you look at the unfunded liabilities and it's over $100 trillion. So, I mean, that's a little scary. Now, lastly, we have the Brexit. This saga continues. Now, Prime Minister Theresa May of the UK actually flew to meet her counterparts this afternoon in a last-minute effort to see if she could strike a deal. Well, let me read some of this to you because, like I said, this was rather breaking news only a couple hours ago, so I didn't have a whole bunch of time to digest it, but it's something that we've been covering on this program for a while. So let me just read a little bit from a BBC article to you just to give you a gist of where it's headed, and then I'll just finish up with some light commentary on it. So Theresa May says she has secured legally binding changes to her Brexit deal a day ahead of MPs voting on it. But European Commission President Claude Shanker warned if the deal was voted down, there was no third chance. They spoke at a joint press conference in Strasbourg after a late meeting. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said the Prime Minister's negotiations had failed and the announcements did not contain anything approaching the changes she had promised Parliament. So recall, this vote is taking place tomorrow, Tuesday, March 12th. Already it's starting to look like it might not get through, but tomorrow's another day. It's going to be exciting over there in the UK. Cabinet Office Minister David Lidington announced that the changes to the Commons shortly before the press conference, saying they would mean the EU cannot try to trap the UK in the Irish backstop indefinitely. And of course, that's one of the main points of contention here. So we'll see if this deal actually has something that the MPs can agree to vote on tomorrow. Mrs. May confirmed she would be opening the debate on Tuesday ahead of a so-called meaningful vote on her deal, which must be agreed by Parliament to come into force. Last time, if you recall, her deal was put to Parliament in January, and it got shut down. But she did survive her vote of no confidence. The PM also said her Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, would publish his legal advice on the changes to the deal before the vote. And then lastly, we have no third chance. Mr. Juncker also warned MPs that they would be putting everything at risk if they voted down the deal. In politics, sometimes you get a second chance, he added. It is what we do with that second chance that counts. There will be no third chance. He added, let us be crystal clear about the choice. It is this deal or Brexit might not happen at all. So according to Jean-Claude Juncker of the EU, it's this deal or Brexit might not happen at all. Now, I don't know how he can say that. That's a rather arrogant comment for him to make. That's not surprising because that's how these people operate over there. You vote our way, and if you don't, go back and vote until you do. So he's at least consistent with the rhetoric coming from the EU bureaucracy. The British people voted. The people of the UK voted. They voted. And again, this was back in 2016. 2016 was a big year. You had the Brexit, and then you had candidate Trump become President Trump. Okay? So that was a big political year where a lot of things happened that the mainstream did not see coming. Okay? We are now at the 11th hour and 59th minute, and now they finally said, okay, you get a second chance to vote on this deal that you basically turned down in January. We're going to give a little bit. You got a second chance now. You either vote for this thing, you either give it the A-OK tomorrow, or you might not leave at all. Wrong. They already voted to leave. Now, what becomes interesting, and I don't know if this is a cynical play by the Prime Minister, Theresa May, because she voted to remain in the EU, but at least she has been saying the right things, and I have given her much credit on this program, as you guys know. I've been giving her much credit because, at least in rhetoric, she has said, what is democracy? The people spoke, they voted in 2016 to leave, and that's what this government must deliver to the people. Absolutely 100% correct. So I don't know if this is some sort of cynical play by her to see if they stay in, according to Juncker. This is it. You either vote for this or you might not leave at all. Because remember, Prime Minister May put to Parliament the following. We have a vote for the deal, which they will vote for tomorrow. If that vote gets shot down, Parliament will vote on Wednesday to see if they want to have the option of a Brexit without a deal, a no-deal Brexit. Okay? If they vote that they do not want to leave with a no deal, then that goes and means that the Article 50 is extended. That just means that the deadline of March 29th gets pushed out. To what time frame, what date, we have no idea. We have no idea, but recall that in the spring there's going to be EU, European Union, parliamentary elections. I've said it before on this program. I don't know how the UK could have votes in that election process because they already voted to leave. So it's almost irrelevant as to whether or not the UK has a deadline extension that overlaps those parliamentary elections for the EU. To me, the people voted. That's it. You've had almost 3 years to deal with this. The fact that you're flying around, literally flying around, in the last day, and then you come back and you only give the members of Parliament a few hours, several hours before this vote to really go through everything to see what really makes sense, if there are true changes or not. I mean, that's akin to Nancy Pelosi saying, well, you know, we have to vote for this thing before we know what's in it. I mean, that's not how it works. So I applaud the Prime Minister on her efforts to get a deal and to stay true to the people of the UK who wanted to leave. That's how it worked. That was the referendum. I give her credit for that. But if this is a cynical ploy to somehow remain in the EU, I mean, shame on her. Shame on her. Because to me, it's either you go and you vote on this deal, or it's a no-deal Brexit. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, because I imagine that if it gets voted down, that there probably would be no third chance, quote-unquote third chance, with the EU bureaucracy. That's my guess. That's my guess because they said it. So it's going to be interesting. We might have some fireworks tomorrow in the UK. That'll definitely be something we discuss and follow up on, because this is going to have huge ramifications politically, economically, and buckle up. Buckle up. We got $4.75 trillion that wants to be spent here, and we have something that we have no idea is going to take place over in Brexit. It's exciting. Great time to be alive. Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out. Leave your comments. I would love to hear from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.